Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. Monday, October 30th, 2023 marks 185 years since the Hawn's Mill Massacre, which occurred in 1838. In that event, 17 Mormon men and boys were killed, and it's just such a terrible event in Missouri history. We'll talk about what an archaeologist can find with Paul Debarthe. He's written his latest book called Hawn's Mill's Hamlet, and he'll uncover some other mysteries there at Hawn's Mill. We'll also talk about some other myths that he's going to bust. Was Nauvoo really a swamp? We'll also talk about why aren't there rapids near Nauvoo as there was in Joseph Smith's day. You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
Oh, we'll give you one more. I got another article underway.
Okay.
The history of the Nauvoo swamp is one of the most fascinating chunks of mythology that the Mormons have created. Virtually every Mormon history, the pageant, the tours, all speak of draining Nauvoo, draining the swamp, so they can make Nauvoo a habitable place.
Well, and plus there was all the mosquitoes that were carrying malaria, right? Well, I mean, they didn't know that was the cause of malaria.
They didn't know the ague was caused by that, but they knew that Joseph Smith noted that along the riverside there's sickness. Well, the Mormons got there in the spring of 1839, a wet spring, probably a wet winter too, so there would have been quite a lot of moisture coming off the bluff down onto the flats. And so they dug the ditch at Durfee Street to drain that. And they did a few other ditches, but to have a swamp, you have to have some kind of barrier that keeps the water from escaping. You don't have that at Nauvoo. As a matter of fact, you've got the Des Moines Rapids going right by Nauvoo, and you can't combine rapids with a swamp.
Okay.
And furthermore, our archaeology shows that you have consistently layers of dark sandy loam, lighter sandy loam, gravel, limestone. And there's no layer of humus in there. That's what you would expect to have if you have a swamp with all the vegetation falling into it and making layers.
So there's no swamp in Nauvoo?
We had some swampy areas, but no swamp in Nauvoo. And just as an example of that, this last August 4 and 5, I was at Nauvoo for the pageant. August 4 was the British performance, beautiful music, I enjoyed it. I'd parked on the grass 2 blocks away and walked in, and 1,000 people or more there. And a sprinkle came in during the performance, but not enough to stop the performance. We went home, the rain continued, we got 7.8 inches in Nauvoo that night.
7 inches of rain?
Almost 8 inches of rain that night.
Wow.
The Durfee ditch was full and just surging toward the river. I had the privilege of escorting Mary and Rebecca, 4 ladies from Burlington, wearing Mormon period garb down to the grounds to that second performance. We parked in the grass in the same places that I'd parked the night before and didn't get stuck. We walked, the ladies didn't get their dresses dirty. Where it had been dusty the night before, now the dark sandy loam was packing down. We got to the performance and we sat in chairs that had 4 legs. We did not tip over, sink in, or we just sat there and enjoyed the performance, and were instructed at least 12 times during that pageant that we're sitting in a swamp. That inspired me to write this article that points out that you pretty well have to have geological characteristics. You have to have a barrier to have a swamp. And you've got rapids. We have some swampy areas, yes, and you can drain those. And yet here to get almost an 8-inch rain, and in 20 hours it's been soaked away and carried away, so the people are walking on virtually dry land. That's not a swamp. And the Aboriginal folks have been there for 10,000 years on that peninsula. I don't know that the mammoth hunters were there that long, that they were residing there, but they were there because we had their projectile points. We don't know that they were living there. But by the time we get to the bison hunters, 9,000 years ago, 9,000 to 3,000 years ago. We have numerous projectile points, and we have the site where one of those projectile points was actually being made there on the site. These people were actually using the resources, living there, burying their dead there.
In the swamp.
And you don't bury your dead in the swamp. And then the Mormons come in, and they started digging basements. Well, actually, we had pre-Mormons digging basements there. That basement for the Times and Seasons was a pre-Mormon basement.
Yeah.
Dug in a swamp? Come on. And so I'm asking for the Mormons to drain the swamp at Nauvoo.
I just want to mention one other thing, because we keep talking about the Des Moines Rapids. If you go there today, there's no rapids. And that's because they have a dam in Keokuk now, and which is what covered up the first Times and Seasons building.
The Lake Cooper has raised the water level 20 to 22 feet.
So they call that part of the Mississippi River a lake now?
Yeah, it's Lake Cooper, named for the engineer that led the building of the dam at Keokuk, 1913.
Okay.
And because it raised the water level that much, here's another phenomenon. The Nauvoo house was prophetically designed in 1841, and they started digging the foundations for it. And building the walls. When Joseph Smith and Hiram were shot and killed, they buried the bodies in the basement of the Nauvoo house. The Nauvoo house is 10 feet lower than the mansion house, or the homestead, and then they buried the bodies in the basement, in the swamp. Now, there's no basement. When Major Bideman remodeled it and made the Riverside Mansion, it now has a crawl space, and every time the river floods, it's wet there, even with the embankment to protect it.
Okay.
But that's because the water level is 20 feet higher.
Right.
Another example, we dug the well at the mansion house, and at 12 feet we hit water. And we hit water, but we also hit limestone, backfill, all kinds of junk. And so we dug the junk out and went all the way down to 28 feet. 28 feet, I think, was the original subsurface water level. That was the same level that they dug the well to in the homestead lot. And at that time, the water level would have been 20 feet lower than what it is today. So when you see the Mormon period subsurface level as compared to today, then that's probably a much more accurate reading of where it was.
Wow.
Well, yeah, we're a little bit off topic there, maybe.
Very cool. Well,
but the swamp at Nauvoo is just so much fun. I mean, that's so fresh because it was just this August that I had that experience with the 7-inch rain, and it just being told I was sitting in the swamp when it just was such an incongruity that my brother and I have been writing an article on that we hope to get published shortly.
Wow, very cool, very cool. All right, so diving back into Hawn's Mill, so October 30th, 1838 was the date of the massacre /incident. I do want to mention one other thing. I spoke with Darren Perry. He's used to be the chief of the Northwest Shoshone. His mother, basically, really quickly, the Mormons referred to what happened in Bear River as the Bear River Battle. 250 Shoshone Indians were killed by the U.S. military there. It's in Idaho now. It used to be part of the state of Desert or Utah at the time. And Darren's mother, made a big deal about, no, this wasn't a battle, it was a massacre, because 250 Shoshone were killed. I don't think any white troops were killed. So it's hard to call that a battle. It really was a massacre. And she made a big deal about renaming this from the Bear River Battle to the Bear River Massacre. And it's now known as the Bear River Massacre because, battle is a more neutral term. So when you talk to these students in Missouri that want to call it the Hawn's Mill incident, is that a way of kind of whitewashing what happened there at Hawn's Mill?
Yeah. But at the same time, there's still a lot of tension.
Right.
There was a plan by the Corps of Engineers to build a dam at Bramer, Missouri. That dam would have flooded the Hawn's Mill area.
Oh.
And there's some RLDS people in particular that banded together and went to work on writing up a plan to save the site from that dam incursion. That was one of the earlier efforts then to try to build a monument there and make it so the site would be preserved and people could understand their history better. The Mormon history and the Missouri history are quite seriously in conflict about it. And to have people live together in peace, sometimes we have to revise our words, our thinking. And for the Mormons to refer to Joseph Smith as a martyr, as compared to referring to him as somebody who had been assassinated while he was running for president of the United States, to me is one of those conflicts in words where I think it's much better for people to understand that he was the first person running for president of the United States who was assassinated in the process. Mm-hmm. Bobby Kennedy was the second.
Right.
But to refer to him as a martyr gives it sort of a religious theme that while it pushes the buttons for the Mormons, it does not communicate nearly as well as being the assassinated victim of a presidential attack. And in terms of the future, I believe the politics of recognizing Joseph Smith as being assassinated while running for president is far more valuable than calling him a martyr. With Hawn's Mill, to recognize it was an incident in the Mormon War. The fact that the Mormon militia had beat the state militia at Battle of Crooked River 2 weeks before. You can't have a private militia beat the state militia. No state militia is going to stand for that.
Right.
Put that in context, then you see the Mormon War was moving to a climax by which the Mormons were in trouble, and they pretty well were going to have to get out of there. And so, yeah, your suggestion that if only Governor Boggs' extermination order had arrived earlier, that it might have saved the lives of those people. But again, Jacob Hawn was not a Mormon. The people that did the attacking included the gentleman who ran Whitney's Mill 4 miles down Shoal Creek on the other side of the line in Livingston County. Another miller from up on Grand River. I mean, economic competition here. The fact that the Mormons had developed these 1,000-acre firms and were inviting poor people to come farm and earn money and produce a crop. First year you help produce the crop, and then we'll sell that to Fort Leavenworth, and next year you can use your money to invest in your own land. How's that going to go over with a bunch of people who are slave owners? Competing and losing the contracts to a bunch of Mormons who bring in a bunch of free labor from the east, from the northeast, who are abolitionists. Fascinating statement by Senator Atchison at the end of the Mormon War, who said, "It's time now for us to Mormonize the abolitionists."
Oh, really? Wow.
That fun?
Wow.
Got to Mormonize the abolitionists. Here, all these Canadians had come in, and they were abolitionists.
Yeah.
So many of these Mormons were. There were some slave owner Mormons, yes,
right.
Not very many. A couple of families that I can come up with, but really the vast majority were abolitionists oriented, and that just simply was a major contrast with the attitude of the Missourians. And when they're starting to take your economic contracts at Fort Leavenworth as well, you understand.
So it's an economic and a religious conflict.
Absolutely, and the economic one has been overlooked. Mike Riggs has done beautiful work on that study. In fact, I think he has a book underway to illustrate that much more closely. It wasn't just the grain, but also contracts for building the military roads. And so the Mormons had the manpower to go do these things and to outbid the slave owners. And so it was an unacceptable condition as a result of the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And then we get to the Civil War, we get to Bleeding Kansas, and here's a continuation of that politics in Missouri. And in some respects, I think we still have the politics of Missouri influenced by those property owners versus the non-property owners.
Very interesting. I know so part of the reason why they settled in why Jacob Hawn settled in Hawn's Mill, there's a river, creek there next
Shoal
to
Creek.
Shoal Creek. And so they use the water power for the grist mill, and that's why he built the mill there. And so he was making a lot of money from both Mormons and non-Mormons, just grinding their corn, grinding their wheat. And so when the Mormons wanted to move there, it's like, come on, it's good for business, right? I know there was when the Mormons saw the Missouri mobs coming, or should I say militia?
Regulars.
The Missouri regulars coming, they hid in a partially completed, some like log cabin kind of a building for protection, which ended up being kind of a death trap.
It was a blacksmith shop which had not been chinked.
Okay.
And so the bullets from outside come through the unchinked gaps.
So
And the Mormons who were standing there couldn't help but get all the bullets came through and hit them.
So for those who don't understand chinking, when you're building a log cabin, you're stacking these logs on top for the walls, and obviously there's going to be gaps, and so they chink the gaps to fill in the gaps, but that hadn't been done yet.
Right.
Can you talk about that? Were you able to find that building and determine anything there?
There was at the time a teardrop driveway at Hawn's Mill, and the best indication I have is that the teardrop driveway is where that blacksmith shop would have been.
Oh, where people can park now?
No, they can't now.
Oh.
Property has been sold. The LDS Church owns it now. They have modified the parking and now have a squared off, so the teardrop drive could become available for excavation. And I'm pretty confident that's where the blacksmith shop ultimately would be found, presuming that they're going to do that.
Oh, so were you able to excavate that then?
No, because it was parking lot then. I couldn't.
Okay.
Couldn't intrude upon the parking spaces. We got right close to it, and the closer we got to it, the more hand-forged metal we found. And so that's why I'm convinced that it's right there close.
That's where the blacksmith shop was.
And the blacksmith shop was not very far from where the mill was. And we didn't find the mill either, but the mill 4 miles down the river at Whitney's Mill is one up on the bluff, and it's, I believe it's 2 rods by, is it 2 rods square? It's big, much larger than I anticipated.
And remind people, what is a rod?
Rod is 16 and a half feet.
Okay.
And so to be 33 feet by 33 feet, you see, is a big building.
Right.
And I think we may have been looking for too small of a building at Hawn's Mill, but it has been pirated. That is, the stones have been taken out. And so to be able to get, well, let me explain. Shoal Creek has changed its course. And one of our excavation results was to demonstrate some of the places where it's been. We had, for example, the Hollies of Steamboat Arabia fame came with a metal detector and found a spot that was 10 feet below surface that had a heavy chunk of metal, and so we went to dig there because we hoped that would be where the mill wheel, or one of the wood part of the mill had been left behind. We got a backhoe and we started at Shoal Creek on the east and dug 30 feet back to where that metal was. And just before we got to the metal, we got to a plastic diaper and a Zarda's cup in plastic.
I think that dates from 1830.
And these were 10 feet below surface, 13 feet below surface.
Okay.
We got to the metal, and it was a 50-gallon barrel drum that had been cut in half and spread open to make it into a feeder trough like what my dad used on the farm in Iowa 50 years ago.
Oh, my.
The Shoal Creek had moved 30 feet at that spot.
Oh, really?
To the west, to the east. And it's also moved to the south. And so to be able to identify precisely where it is, we've got the bypass. The bypass is pretty clear, and probably the holding pool for the logs. So, and somebody had gotten in there illicitly with a backhoe and messed around and dug some holes, thinking they were going to find the well. We chose that area then to mark off 4 10-foot squares adjacent to make it so you have a spot cleared for a monument. Because the signs, the monuments that have been put up over there for the last century have been shot, they've been mutilated, they've been burned, and partiers there have had a lot of fun, but it's not been a safe place for Mormons. And so we dug that spot, and in getting down to 3 feet below surface, we encountered not only charcoal, but burned granite from where the mill wheels had been burned to make it easier to hone them off. And those granite mill wheels had to be cut and smoothed down to where they would turn one facing the other with only a thousandth of an inch of clearance. So that the grain coming through would come through where it's up here closer to half an inch, but that grain as it comes out through the little slots gets ground by the granite, and so you only want a thousandth of an inch of that grain by the time it gets out. That's why it's called a grist mill. And then you can pull it out and take it up and run it down through again.
And it becomes flour.
But you've got to have that precision to get those stones face to face, turning, the top one turning, so that it can actually do that grinding. And so the precision of lithic technology to be able to with a hammer and chisel, do that kind of work. The millwrights were just awesome people in that skill. Mm-hmm. And so here we were finding that they started out with a big boulder of granite, and they started burning it and chopping it down to get down to those mill wheels that were used at Hawnsville. And so that would have been close to the mill itself. The mill itself, undoubtedly, would have been 3 stories high, because you get the first grinding of the grist, you take it back up and you run it through the process to bring it down again. The whole study of the mill technology of the 19th century is fascinating, and I would so much like to see us be able to see that standing again someday.
Yeah.
But the other problem is that with 17 bodies in a well, or 15 bodies in a well.
Let's talk about why the bodies are in a well. Tell people might not know.
There was an unfinished well that was being dug at the time of the incident at Hawnsville, and on the 30th of October, these people were killed. They dispersed. People ran across the dam and up Escape Hill. They ran a mile or a quarter of a mile, wherever they could find shelter. Some had been wounded, and some were busy dying. One gentleman got up on the wall, thinking he was safe, and got hit by a bullet for probably some 300 yards distance. And we have the story of the gentleman bragging about having made that lucky shot. But there's the escapees, the people who got shot. It's such a sad story, and it's so unnecessary. But the people came back the next day, and not feeling like they were under jeopardy, they simply dumped the bodies in the well, with Sardius Smith, the 10-year-old who had been shot in the head last, as the final one on top.
And so basically the well became a burial spot for all these people.
And so Mike Riggs and I decided that we would do everything we could to avoid finding the well, because we think that it's the kind of site that is like the Arizona site in Pearl Harbor. We know 2,000 people were buried there. We know who they were. But what better memorial than just leaving that ship there as the tomb for those sailors?
But you're saying that some other people didn't feel the same way as you and were trying to find the well and find the bodies.
Right.
And when did that happen? From in the 50s?
Well, in the 60s, I know that, I don't want to use people's names, but in the 60s, I know that there was an announcement, we found it. I think what they found was the charcoal down at that 3-foot level. But I think they had no business digging there at that point. And then I'm not sure when it would have been. I think it was in the 90s. Tobacco got in there and did its damage. But there's sufficient hints to give people a chance to speculate about where the well was, and so the idea of being able to find the well has been a driving motivator for a lot of people. And I understand that, but with the thousands of people that are now descended from people that were buried there, if you allow all those people to be polled, you have such a variety of responses. Many want them left, some want them dug up and moved, but I'm convinced that it's the best lesson in history, I believe, is to leave that marker there to let people understand there's an incident in the war that was unnecessary. We can learn to live together peacefully and harmoniously if we will. And to allow our angers to cause us to shoot each other is pretty foolish, and here's an example of that.
Yeah, because I do know a lot of people are very interested in where those bodies are buried, and so it's very interesting to hear your perspective about why you purposely avoided trying to find it.
Well, we have information that I think helps to refine and guide people to it. But again, it's changed hands. It was in the hands of Community of Christ. It's now in the hands of the LDS Church. They're doing a better job of keeping the place mowed and brush out and poison ivy is reduced. But and I am concerned that one of the significant things we found. You see, I involved students in hands-on history, in hands-on archaeology. I had high school students from China Mission East, and they did a marvelous job. I want to encourage people to recognize that kids finding artifacts find history. They learn to love and appreciate history. We had college students involved. I was teaching at Johnson County Community College, and we had some of those students involved. We set up a field school for Western Missouri University at Maryville, and had an 8-day concentration for them in 2006. They worked on the Western Hill, and there we came down on good evidence of a Middle Woodland village, some 2,000 years of age. And one projectile point that probably takes us back 5,000 years there. So that site has been occupied for long term. It's a sacred site for the Mormons, but it's also a sacred site for the prehistoric people. We have a coral bead that probably comes from the Gulf of Mexico. We have what appears to be catlinite, probably from Minnesota. So we're talking about people trading goods for 1,000 miles to lose them at Hawn's Mills. So let's appreciate the cultural heritage that's there, the history that's there, the prehistory that's there. And I think the monument not only ought to be celebrating the victims at Hawn's Mill, but the earlier unnamed victims should be recognized and appreciated as well. The First Nations people have been victims of American history as long as we've been writing history, and that's something we can make better. You mentioned Massacre.
Bear River Massacre, yeah.
Yeah, the fact that we've got numerous accounts. The last one, Wounded Knee. Boy, to have that horrible massacre, again, totally unnecessary. But probably 300 people killed in that one, buried on the hill.
Yeah, it's terrible. The way the Native Americans have been treated is a poorly told story, I would say.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with archaeologist Paul Debarthe, author of Hawn's Mills Hamlet. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about his wife. I was surprised to find out that she was the first woman ordained in the Community of Christ.
Well, there were 4 women ordained that first night on November 17 of 1985. Rena and I were ordained together, and I think she was the first woman in the RLDS Church to be ordained.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, subscribe on either Patreon or at gospeltangents.com. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire audio uninterrupted. On our $10 tier, if you would like to see the whole video, you can see that either on youtube.com/gospeltangents, or I've got a special Facebook group devoted for full videos. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com and sign up for just $10 a month. For $20 a month, if you'd like to get some bonus content, maybe some of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, you can sign up for that. And then if you'd like to talk to me for $100 a month, we'll do a monthly phone call on something like Zoom, and you can ask me anything you want. So thanks again. Also, don't forget about the merch, mugs, t-shirts, hats, things like that. I'm trying to get the ties up there. Hopefully I can get up there. And thanks again for watching Gospel Tangents, and click here for some more videos.